Welcome to the June 7th, an eventful June 7th it has been. PFF forecast. We've got some good stuff to talk about. A new fitness routine that Brad and I are just learning about that we may get to. But we're going to talk a little bit about PGA and LIV, what this could mean for the NFL, break down some of the stuff. Obviously, Brad being a lawyer, uniquely prepared to talk about this kind of thing, but it is fascinating. So we'll dig into that a little bit. We've got some NFL news. We're going to talk D-Hop and Danielle Hunter, some interesting kind of things with DeAndre Hopkins, but also what are the Vikings doing? What does that mean for Kirk Cousins? What does that mean potentially for people who might trade for Kirk Cousins? And then we're going to close out with a little NBA Finals. We've got Game 3 this evening. Let's rock. Brad, I feel like today is like if you played like news drop bingo, like this is what you get.
I was going to say that the sky outside my window is currently blood orange. I don't know if you can tell that on the camera because it is the New York City, air mixed with the fires from Canada coming down. And that's not the weirdest thing I think I've seen today. It might be my timeline for various different reasons. So it certainly has been quite the news drop Wednesday, this June 7th of 2023.
The smoke that you're seeing is actually coming from Zion Williamson's Twitter, which is currently burning. His phone is on fire somewhere in New Orleans. So anyways, let's talk LIV PGA because this was really surprising to me. I felt it was weird. I actually felt like the PGA was gaining a little bit of kind of momentum. I think LIV had a bunch of momentum. Their tournaments just aren't that interesting. People don't really care anymore. The majors were interesting for a little while, and then it was like, oh, Brooks won. Like, this is normal. The majors are normal. Who cares? So it was surprising to me, but obviously money, like there has to be this just massive money component. I haven't seen any like dollars being thrown around. Do you have any insight into that? Is that your read as well? What do you kind of make of this whole thing?
Yeah, so I think the big thing that maybe got lost a little bit was the PGA did respond in some capacities to LIV. The biggest reason or the biggest things they did was increase the purse size for a lot of the bigger tournaments, not the majors. Those are actually not the PGA. It's why Brooks could play in them. But for, Murfield Village this past week for the Memorial Tournament, I think it had a $20 million total purse. Victor Hovland won like $3.5 million, much more than before. That money didn't just like magically appear. Apparently, they asked sponsors to kick in more money. They also dug into some reserve funds that they had. And so I think they realized that long term, what they were doing was not actually sustainable. And they were, if they wanted to keep competing and keep players happy, probably have to do things they could no longer do. There's so many fascinating wrinkles here, though. So they were a non-for-profit organization, which I didn't realize the NFL was until 2015. I think the NBA was for a while. Like all the leagues were at some point. I knew they had an antitrust exemption. I didn't realize they were non-for-profits. But the big thing I think is fascinating is, so essentially what happened, from my understanding, is the Saudi government, obviously it's this PIF, this public investment fund, but let's be honest, it's basically the Saudi Arabian government and MBS have acquired, it looks like 49%, ownership stake in worldwide golf, right? It's not just the PGA, it's also the DP Tour, which I think is Europe and maybe Eurasia or kind of a larger body there. And it seems like the PGA will maintain control, but there is exclusivity in future investments from the PIF. And they have a right of first refusal to any other potential investment that does try to enter the fold. I guess they could probably match it or just outright, deny someone's ability to enter into the conversation. So for all intents and purposes, Saudi Arabia owns a major sports league, worldwide at this point.
That was my read as well. And I think the structure is really interesting. So the PGA chairman is supposedly going to be the CEO of this new league. But his boss, the chairman, is the guy who was running LIV, who I can't remember his exact name. I don't have it on the tip of my tongue here. And it's bad of me, but he is the second in command in Saudi Arabia to Prince MBS, right? He is quite literally like number two there. So he is the chairman of Newcastle FC, right? That the Saudis bought. He is kind of he is the guy leading this, initiative into sports, and he's the chairman. So he is going to be in charge, at least as I read it. I mean, do you read that differently, where you see, hey, here's the CEO, the guy who's the chairman is the person that owns the league, and by the way, has been pretty active in the other, things that he's done. Am I reading that wrong? Because I think Monahan is trying to say like, hey, no, don't worry, guys, we now have control over the league. And it's like, what world are you living in?
Monahan has as much power as Tom Wambsgans is my read. So yeah, I see it the same way as you do. And for those that don't know that reference, that's a Succession reference. Tom has zero power, even though he is the active CEO of Waystar Gojo. But anyway, so yeah, no, I see it the exact same way. I guess the fascinating thing to me is just like we saw with the NBA ABA merger back in, I don't know, late 60s, early 70s. I mean, the lawsuit that was in place that, of course, now disappears, which I also think when people say, why would the PGA do this? There's no longer discovery now into the PGA, which I'm sure they're very happy about. There's also no discovery, the skeletons in the closet for Saudi Arabia, literal skeletons in closets. But so, it's that like the league, the players may still try to sue or try to prevent this from happening. I mean, the Saudi Arabian government in this case were saying there was a monopoly on golf and that the PGA had too much power. How does merging with them and making one massive league, that there's even less competition now? I think that's interesting. Like, this might not be over with.
That was going to be one of my questions, because I don't know. I've got to think that the powers that be foresaw the PGA Tour players going, wait, hold on. Like, this is kind of shady. I turned down all this money, and now you're doing this. So they have to have a plan here, right? There's no way. And actually, I listened to Rory's press conference. He was heated, but you could tell that like he'd heard some things that made him go, okay, like, I'm not going to cause a huge scene here. So what do you think he heard? I think that in putting this deal together, the two, heads of the tips of the spear said, okay, what are we going to do to make good to the players? So I think the players are going to acquiesce. I mean, this is their livelihood. They want to play golf. Like, there's a US Open in a couple of, weeks, whatever. But I'm curious, is this something that like the US now is going to look at as a government and be interested in? Like, how could the courts even be involved? This is obviously an international thing. That was my initial thought, because you're right. It is a huge kind of monopoly on that economy.
Yeah, I mean, the DOJ, I think right now is looking into whether a JetBlue Spirit Airlines merger is going to pass. Like, we've seen things of this nature. I think it does get complicated when you have a foreign government. But for me, it's interesting because do you say, okay, right, does that make it kind of like less actionable for the Department of Justice in the United States, or is it signaling even more of a monopoly because it's basically a global monopoly on the game of golf? And then to your initial question, yes, look, the Rory McIlroys of the world to go into that meeting and come out of it and still kind of seemingly be a supporter of Jay Monahan. His big differentiation was, I hate LIV. I knew there was always going to be foreign money coming in. I just hated a competitive league, and so now that we're getting just the PGA, but with a bunch more money, so he's probably fine with it, or will be once he gets compensated. The issue is, and I don't know how the voting works, if you're a lower end player, and I think a guy named Grayson Murray, I guess, apparently told Monahan to resign in the meeting, and Rory told him to shut the F up in the middle of the meeting. Those guys are probably scared, right? Because the main point here is we want smaller fields for these kind of mega tournaments, almost like a Super League type thing. These like those guys aren't going to make it, right? And so, especially once, the guys that basically got their tour card because players like Brooks left, if those guys get reinstated next year, the guys that are barely on the fringe are going to be playing on the Korn Ferry Tour or whatnot in the near future. So my point is, I don't know how the voting works, right? Like, I don't know if there's a percentage you got to hit or how the case may go. But yes, the Scotties and Rorys and Spieths and Justin Thomases, they're getting something. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, they're definitely getting something. Okay, so I think everyone's question has got to be, what does this mean for other sports? Obviously, the NFL, is the big prize. I guess part of this has to be the question of what's the incentive from the Saudis? And I'm really curious your opinion here because everyone's got, it's sports washing, right? They want to distract from the bad things that they're doing, and they want to make it seem like they're this great nation that is doing all of these great things for humanity, and look at all the great things they're doing in sports. But I think I'm going to make a little bit of an argument here where actually doing all these things in sports draws more attention to the things that they're doing that are not, that are unsavory. And so are we maybe looking a little too deep into this? And this is like, these are a bunch of men who love sports with an absurd amount of money. Like, what would you and I do with $700 billion? Like, yeah, I'd probably want to do a lot more in the sports world. Like, that's a lot of fun. I guess, how do you read into this? Do you see this as a kind of thing to watch out for? Do you think they're going to be on the aggressive? Is there any in to an NFL, NBA, MLB? What do you think?
Yeah, so a couple things there. I kind of tend to agree with you, and I want to be sensitive. Like I've Googled a bunch of things. The concept of sports washing, I want to read more about it. If there's anyone in the Discord or Twitter or whatever who can send me something, I don't, like you said, I don't really get the concept. For me, I mean, I don't think any person that was like, I'm anti, terrorist regimes or countries that support them, whatever, aren't going to be like, well, now I'm cool with it because they have a minority stake in golf. Like, so I don't really get that. I do think it's important to say, like, all right, if we're now going to have, I mean, look, even from a human rights standpoint, I mean, free press and gay rights for LGBTQ community, obviously two things that are not on the docket right now in Saudi Arabia. Like, that's, I think, more of a consistent future problem. I need to make sure that is not infiltrating, the way we operate in sports that are based in the U.S. But I don't really get the past looking view. Anyway, like I said, I want to read more about it. I want to know more about it. So, but yeah, for me, the thing is, look, their money clearly is 95% tied to oil. And we know that that's going to run out at some point in, our lifetime. So you better start diversifying your portfolio as soon as humanly possible. And I think, frankly, it makes a lot of sense to start investing in a bunch of sports leagues. Yeah, I mean, look, the valuation of these clubs are skyrocketing in every single sport. I do think, and I know there already is some outside money in the NBA. I think there's a chance that it gets, like there. If a sport I was going to guess was going to do a full-on live type thing, I mean, look, if the NBA, if you convince 10, 15 dudes to go play for a team over there and just surround the rosters with like fringe NBA guys like they already have in some leagues in, over just kind of, in the Balkans or wherever these, Spain, these main leagues are, like, you can pull that off, right? Like, imagine all right, we're going to get like Damian Lillard and like, the 10th to 20th best player in the NBA, that carries teams, right? I mean, look at the NBA right now. So that, I think, is fascinating. For me, the NFL is just too hard. Even if you say, okay, I'll make the same argument for quarterbacks. If the offensive lines stink and the receivers stink, it's not going to be a great product. But yeah, I think this is not the end of the road. If anything, I think it could be a signal of more to come for, I think the NBA is the big league I'd keep an eye on, frankly.
I would agree 100%. I think first and foremost, you've got to think about the access. The NFL is just, it's a fortress, right? It's so impenetrable. And they've got so many advantages that other sports leagues don't have. You just mentioned the first one, which is you need so many players to construct a team. And the other is that there is not this untapped pool of great football players the world round. It is a US sport. So basketball is totally different than that, right? You only need 5, but really you only need 2, and you can fill out the roster with guys from anywhere, not just the US, but anywhere in the world. In fact, now we're seeing great players come from all over the world. So I agree. That is what I would be watching for. And I think it's going to be really interesting. And this is where, I would have a lot more faith in Adam Silver than I do Jay Monahan. And the fact that it is a team sport, I think, makes it hard. I think the individual sport makes it uniquely easy to do what they did. And so I don't know that like leads to another sport per se. I think F1 is really interesting. It's gaining a lot of popularity. I wonder if that's, like, I think we have to consider the types of sports that they may like. I think basketball is a very popular sport. There's no reason to believe it isn't. I think the NFL, it's a prize, but I'm not sure that's something that, the prince is watching on a Sunday on his yacht. So like I agree with you. I think it is the NBA. I think Formula One is a really interesting one. Are there any other sports that come to mind? Maybe they're not necessarily like US focused. Obviously, global soccer is something as well.
Yeah, in soccer, obviously, we saw this week Karim Benzema is going to a Saudi team for a 3-year, $643 million contract. I just saw like an hour before we started N'Golo Kante, who played for my former Chelsea. I'm now a Brentford guy. No one cares. But anyway, yeah, he's signed for $100 million a year, and he's like a washed center. I mean, great player formerly for a long time, but is really not a phenomenal player anymore. It doesn't really matter, right? I guess the last one I would say is, I don't know anything about the structure, but tennis is interesting to me. Like, is tennis playing their players enough? Is it, are all the players happy? I know Djokovic was obviously pissed off about a lot of things. I think that was more to do with like the countries that wouldn't let him play. I don't think the league themselves necessarily were not helping him, but that one, look, you get Djokovic, Alcaraz, and a couple of guys and say, hey, come play for this different tennis, federation. You probably take over the whole sport.
Yeah, that's a good one. Similarly, like individually yoked. Okay, great. We're going to transition to a little more NFL player talk. Before you do, if you're not a part of the aforementioned PFF Discord, the printing press, get yourself involved. The link is in the description. We also tweet it out. It is a great community of now 1,000 people who love to bet. And if you are someone that loves to bet, and you probably are if you listen to this podcast, the off season is for football right now, but it is on season for basketball. We're transitioning into a basketball podcast. For those of you that are new, we're a Mercury podcast. We've been betting Ben Brown's WNBA model, which he posts, by the way, in the PFF Printing Press Discord. So you can get that every single day there. It's a fantastic place. A lot of really, really sharp bettors that are there and a part of it as well. So go join that. And please share the podcast here as well. One of the best things that you can do for people is share something good. So if you enjoy this podcast, we appreciate it. Toss it over and share it. Share the Printing Press Discord link as well. We appreciate it. And if you want a little discount, Forecast, FORECAST is the promo code on PFF.com or in the PFF app. Get 25% off a PFF Plus subscription. The fantasy season is fast approaching. There was going to be some big news coming on the PFF product side for fantasy season. So you will not be disappointed. I would go grab your subscription now. That's just my recommendation. I have no insider information, Brad. I don't know anything. But I'm giving advice to the people.
I may or may not know what you're talking about, and I also would probably run to get a subscription pretty quickly. Yeah.
Neither confirm nor deny. Okay. DeAndre Hopkins and Danielle Hunter. There's some news there. Brad, I'll let you kind of break each one down.
Yeah, so the big one for DeAndre Hopkins now has an official visit set with the Tennessee Titans. I believe he crossed over with Mike Vrabel for a period in Houston. I think he was a linebackers coach there for a little bit before going to Tennessee, if I remember that correctly. So taking a visit, they obviously they might have the worst wide receiver core in the NFL. I find it interesting for two reasons. I mean, one, you kind of went down this road with the Julio Jones situation. Obviously, you're not trading a second-round pick in this scenario with Hopkins. And then B, it's been an offseason contraction for them, which I think was smart in a lot of ways. Do you then kind of pivot back and spend a bunch of money? Maybe it's only 1 year, 10 million, whatever. But is that kind of worth it for Ryan Tannehill's last year? Like, kind of what are you doing? Should you just be cheap and get ready for 2024 and beyond?
Is there I think this makes no sense to me because exactly the point that you made. Is there another move that could be made, right? Is there a non-Tannehill move that this would necessitate, or is this looking at what you did last year, which is you got rid of AJ Brown, it really hurt your team, and going, well, look, if we just add a stud receiver, where were we with AJ Brown? We won the division. We win it again. This division is not very good. And maybe this is more of a team getting kind of desperate. and saying like, look, we don't want to go back to being a bottom feeder. We've got this team in Nashville. People are kind of excited about it. So I see this as like a real form of desperation as opposed to having any kind of plan.
No, I agree. And look, it's interesting with the new GM. Obviously, he was not there for Julio, but also this does smell to me like Mike Vrabel, who I think is probably one of the more powerful head coaches in the NFL. Not taking away anything from Rand Carthon. I think he made a lot of decisions this offseason himself, clearly. But like you're even asking, a guy like Kevin Byard, an all-pro safety, our highest graded safety over the last 2 seasons combined, to take a pay cut this offseason. Like, you're doing a lot of things to go the other direction. You're trading up for your future quarterback. I guess the only argument I would make is, so yes, it's kind of, hey, it's that. Let's stay relevant because we're not a big market, yada, yada. And maybe if you can convince him for a 2-year deal and just say, all right, maybe he makes Will Levis's life easier in 2024. And hopefully then Treylon Burks, who obviously they got with the A.J. Brown pick, hopefully by then he's a stud. He's a true number one. Our guy Chig Okonkwo is the best tight end in the NFL at that point. But it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I guess, like the division point's good. They're just probably saying, hey, like, we would become the clear number 2 in the AFC South, which, it means absolutely nothing, but it's something to them, I suppose.
Yeah, it's look, when you have Chig Okonkwo, you got to feature him, right? I mean, that's
correct.
So I don't know what they're doing, but it really does stink of desperation. I think we can never, it's tough, right? Because it's like there's pressures. You look at a GM, you look at a coach. I think we're looking at the GM and going, okay, the GM should have kind of a smart kind of take on this, right? We think they brought in a really sharp guy, but at the end of the day, some of these bigger moves and these desires to remain, like, hold on to some breaths of contention are coming from the ownership, right? And like, I don't know, sometimes I think we ignore like how impactful that is. Like, if that's what the owner wants to do, like that's what the owner's going to do. And like literally could have had this idea spur of the moment, but now the team is going to act on it. So that's kind of my take. I mean, we looked at DeAndre Hopkins numbers a bunch, and you can see these on pff.com. I would encourage you to go take a look. But like his grade has diminished over time. This is not a like AJ Brown replacement, right? Like, so it really it does stink of some desperation. Any sort of domino effect if they were to grab him?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does address probably their biggest weakness. Their offensive line is still pretty bad, but I think they can get around that with a lot of play action they use and things they've done to kind of mitigate how bad that unit's been for a while now. Frankly, without a healthy Taylor Lewan, obviously taking Peter Skoronski in the first helps as well. But yeah, no, it does. I think it's meaningful. Like, I agree with you. And obviously our numbers say he's not DeAndre Hopkins. He's still a good player. I think it's almost gone too far now. Maybe some teams kind of looking for a bit of a help from reporters saying he's like washed. He's not washed. He's just not, he's not an elite number 1 receiver. He's still a top 50 wide receiver in the NFL, I think, comfortably. That might even be conservative. So yeah, no, I think it does matter. It's just, I mean, look, their defense was their secondary last year was really bad. Can they improve in all these different areas? Like, it would take everything that's gone wrong in the last couple of years. There would take massive regression, I still think, for them to win this division. And if you don't win the AFC South, I don't think you get a playoff team out of this division just because how good the rest of the AFC conference is.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree with you. Okay, what about Danielle Hunter?
This one's fascinating to me. I'm very, very surprised by this news coming down. So just got reported probably 10 minutes before we hopped on the show. Ian Rappaport, NFL Media, saying that Danielle Hunter has had a bunch of teams call to see if they can trade for him. So the situation here, Hunter obviously held out a couple off seasons ago in 2021, looking for a new contract. Instead of getting an extension, and there were, neck injuries, kind of a tough situation. They moved some cash forward in his deal for this season, and now he's coming off a double-digit sack, 70-plus pressure. I looked last week, he was top 5 in defensive stops against the run as well. Like, coming off a phenomenal season, is owed $5.5 million in cash because they moved cash forward in his deal. So there's a 0% chance he plays a snap on his current contract. I'm just surprised because 2 reasons. A, you already traded Zadarius Smith to Cleveland, and B, if you're Brian Flores, a very hot, clearly not right now a head coach candidate, but I'm sure had many suitors for defensive coordinator. How do you convince him to take this job and then say, yeah, by the way, our defense was awful last year, and now we're going to trade 150 pressures off of this defense but you should still come take this job. So, maybe it's a battle through the media. Maybe Minnesota's trying to say, like, we don't have to pay you. We could just trade you, or I don't know what the case is, but I think it's very relevant. And I think there would be a lengthy list of suitors. Yes, there are injury concerns, but he's like 28 and a half years old still. And when healthy is a top 10 edge defender in the NFL.
100%. I mean, there would be a very long line. It's also interesting, just thinking about, again, okay, so, we know, what do we know about Kwesi, the GM, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, the GM of the Minnesota Vikings, formerly with the Browns, and then before then with the Niners. Both those teams have you can see how they've treated stud edge defenders. Myles Garrett, obviously in Cleveland, and then you go back to San Francisco, and they invested a ton of capital at the top of the draft in defensive line and edge defense. Obviously, Nick Bosa, that guy's contract is going to be, obscene at some point. So you would figure, Kwesi's got to be, expecting that, probably want to get this done before then if you're going to get it done. But you would imagine that he's going to value defensive line and pass rush. Kevin O'Connell came from LA, where certainly they had the best defensive lineman in the world in Aaron Donald, so he knows what that can do. So I don't really understand it unless there's some kind of belief that, or something they know about him that makes them think differently than we do, and looking just at the data. So is there any hint of anything there? Like, is he a malcontent? Is he not a hard worker? Is there something?
It has to be the injuries, because I mean, the guy is the most ripped dude I've ever seen in my entire life. And I saw him, at the facility back in the day. Quick little name drop. I try not to do that every episode, but no, he's a freak of nature. It has to be. Look, the neck injury is always scary. But look, he played like his most snaps of his entire career last year. I think over 900 snaps, which is a ton for an edge rusher. But yeah, maybe saying, hey, look at the, like a Chandler Jones deal. I don't know though, because as I say that, I mean, Von Miller got paid at 33 years old last offseason. Danielle Hunter's 28 and a half years old. Like, it's got to be the injuries. But if they trade him away, I think they will have the worst defense in the NFL. I'm not even sure it'll be close. And hey, I mean, I guess you could say Kwesi, analytical GM. All right, we're going to take the money we save. We're going to extend TJ Hockenson and Justin Jefferson and just go full on offense and try to have a top, we're going to pay Christian Darrisaw soon, yada, yada, yada. But like you said, I mean, look, analytics doesn't mean the defense is irrelevant. I know there's jokes and hashtags and whatnot. You have to be at least competent on that side of the football.
100%. I don't think this is we don't believe in the importance of defense. I think there are a couple of, so I'm gonna play a little conspiracy theorist here. Okay, so you've got Kirk Cousins. You've got a bad NFC. I think we've made the case for maybe the Vikings could be competitive, but you could also be looking at this and going, how could we kind of get ourselves into Super Bowl contention? And if you do that, you have to look past your division, you have to look past your conference, and you got to look at who else is out there, right? Are you going to beat the Chiefs? Are you going to beat the Bills? Are you going to beat, even the Eagles, the Niners, right? And you got to look yourself in the mirror and go, okay, we have a bad defense with Danielle Hunter. We're going to go spend a bunch of money on him. By the time we're competitive again, he's not going to be with us. We've got an offense that has the best, if not, at least one of the best top 5 wide receivers in the NFL. But other than that, not a ton. We got a couple of nice pieces here. We got a good left tackle, but at the quarterback position, are we really thinking we're getting the value for the money that we need? Is this a subtle tank job that's being done in Minnesota?
No, it's a fair conspiracy. And here's what I would say. If they move on from Hunter, and then also it looks like Dalvin Cook, I mean, some reporters have said it's a foregone conclusion has been the language used. I think Jeremy Fowler said that. Hopefully I'm not mixing the person up there, but so he'll be gone too. And I don't think we think he affects the win total all that much, but yeah, at a certain point, do you try and shop Kirk Cousins to San Fran? I'm not trying to be, everyone loves that conspiracy because of Kyle Shanahan, but look, go get Trey Lance and say, all right, sink or swim. Either you're going to be so bad that we're going to get a top 5, top 10 pick next year, or we buy low on a recent, first round pick from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And then, hey, all right, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, a decent offensive line, and a rookie can step in, and we just start over. But, and it's weird, too. I mean, your first and second round picks last year in the secondary do not play, right? You have Andrew Booth at corner, Lewis Cine at safety, just do not play at all, basically, last year. So, like, they're in such a weird spot. But I don't know. I come back to Flores, too, though. Like, why would he leave Pittsburgh? I mean, yes, he wasn't the D coordinator, but I'm sure he had other offers. If I remember correctly, he did have other offers, and choose to go to Minnesota, and then they just trade away all their talent. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's very strange. I really wonder how much the kind of Caleb Williams opportunity is enticing teams to make certain decisions. I mean, I would say if I were Minnesota, I would really look strongly at that. If the Niners were interested, I would be interested. I'd be very interested. And everyone hates the idea. Everyone hates it and just rants and raves about, not wanting to tank and all these different things. And there are other ways to do it for sure, right? I mean, the Chiefs are a great example of that. But if you're going to get a Patrick Mahomes, your chances of getting a Patrick Mahomes are much better at the number 1 pick than they are at number 10. Like, that's just a fact. So you're increasing your probability there. What I wonder is, has Kwesi and O'Connell, have they gotten the kind of confidence of ownership to be able to do that at this point? Is that something? I mean, you like what would you expect the ownership, the Wilf family in Minnesota to say?
It's funny you mentioned, because you talked about Tennessee. My perception of the Wilfs is they would love to win 10 games every year. Obviously, they want to win 15 and go to the Super Bowl, but they want to be a competitive football team every single season. And look, I'm not going to knock them. I think they might be the best run organization in the sport from a business standpoint. You can argue football, but I mean, they're top 10 in revenue in Minnesota. They were number 1 in the NFLPA ranking for a reason. This isn't my biased opinion. I think that's kind of an objective opinion, but nevertheless, like, that's also what kind of scares me away. I don't think they're open to a tank, even if it's a soft tank and you kind of massage a little bit and dress it up with sparkles and rainbows. Like, I don't think that's in their DNA at all. But hey, maybe Kwesi and O'Connell convinced them and bought enough political capital to say, look, now we've proven to you we're good. We just inherited a team and won 13 games last year. Let us do this how we want to do it, build it from the foundation up, and believe that we can do this thing the right way. Because otherwise they are kind of stuck. It's like, I don't know why this is public, but Kwesi's deal's a 4-year deal. He has 3 years left. And if he has another year this year of Kirk, then you try to figure out the new quarterback in 2024. That's with 2 years left. If that goes poorly, he probably doesn't get another shot. And like that could be it. So, now we're going really far down the road, but they have to think of all these things. I mean, the average GM tenure is not very long.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is not. It's very interesting. What do you think ends up happening if you had to make a call?
I think they still get it done, because I really think the issue is the trade value on Hunter. Look, we agree a lot of suitors, good player, but because the injuries and the fact that you have to give an extension right away, maybe a 2nd round pick, best case scenario, in my opinion. And so if you're Minnesota, I think you say, unless this trade gets us a pick that gets us from 11 to 4 next year in the draft, there's not really a point in doing it. And so that's why I say I think it's kind of more of just we're not going to just get rolled over and give you whatever you want. I'll guess that they find a way to get him paid for the next, 3-year deal.
I think you're right. All right, let's close out with a little NBA Finals. Game is 3-4 hours away at this point, game 3. So you might not be listening to this beforehand, but if you're listening to it after, you can laugh at us. It is Miami +3 at home against the Nuggets. The total 214.5. So it is even lower than it was. Obviously, it ended up going over in game 2, went under in game 1. Brad, where's your head at on this?
Yeah, very fascinating. I know, home road splits are kind of noisy and everything, but apparently the Nuggets defense is way worse on the road as opposed to playing at home, which is interesting. I know we lost, or, I guess I didn't really say an official play, but I know the overhit last game. The shooting obviously regressed. Max Strus was, lights out early. I still think the under could have hit in that game. It just, the shot making was just too good. I don't know. Heat +3 is interesting to me. I think they come home and they're confident and cocky. I think the Nuggets just lost their first home game of the entire playoffs. I don't think Tyler Hero is going to play still, but I think Miami's going to, I might take Miami in the points at home. And then I think Nuggets could kind of get fired up down 2-1, maybe rattle off a couple wins, but I lean Miami in this game.
I tend to agree with you. I think everyone wants to predict kind of a Nuggets bounce back, but I thought there were some issues with the Nuggets, mainly their supporting cast, right? Like that's usually what they rely on at home. Michael Porter Jr. Looks like he's been doing the Zion Williams like offseason training regimen. His mind is in a different spot than the defensive end of the ball, like not protecting the important the basket. Let's put it that way. And so he's I think on the verge of like a nothing here in this situation. They're not getting a ton of great contribution at home, and then you go on the road. You'd expect that to really kind of go down another clip, and you'd expect the Miami supporting cast that did play really, really well in game 2 to only continue. Now, the only thing is the Heat got back to their incredible 3-point shooting ways. You figure there's a little bit of regression coming there. The play that I really like are Jokic alternate point totals. I took his over in the last game. We talked about that a little bit in terms of their kind of the Heat strategy. I'm not sure how much faith I have in Michael Malone to come with a counterpunch, to be honest with you. Apparently they had a film session where he ripped into people for like 20 minutes or maybe longer than that. It was just like it was an intense session. I like Michael Malone a lot, but I think there's a big Spoelstra advantage. So I'm curious. I think that Joker may just have to come in and score points. And he can. That's the thing, is he can. So it's not like a strategy that's like, oh man, that sucks. So I think it could be one that they just go, hey, Joker, lean into it. The supporting cast, you got MPJ out there, has no idea what they're doing. They're kind of locking down Jamal Murray. Joker, you got to carry us. And I think a Joker 50-point game could still be a loss. But like, I think a Joker 50-point game is something that I could see happening here.
I totally agree. I think the press conference with Spoelstra was pretty funny, where they got asked, did you try to make him a scorer instead of a facilitator? And it wasn't, to me, like, he shut the question down very quickly and tried to be like, hey, Jokic is great at everything. The way I read his response was like, yes, it's exactly what we're doing. And I don't want it to become a narrative or get out there, because that is 110% our plan. And he is better, or it's better for us if he can just score, make a lot of twos. Yes, he can shoot, but obviously, was driving a lot in that game. I also think it tires him out more too. Or maybe you can kind of wear him down because he's driving the basket, getting fouled a lot, getting hacked, all these things. You get your your fouls from Udonis Haslem or whatever if you need them. And I would say this too. So I agree with there 100%. And this is kind of just honestly narrative, but I do think we'll get some regression from the 3-point shooting. I think this is a Jimmy game. Jimmy has not played well in like 3-4 games now. The first 2 finals games and kind of the end of Boston, he wasn't bad, but he wasn't, 40-point Jimmy. I think we go back to Miami. He's a little bit fired up, a little bit motivated back in his home building. I think he could go for 40 tonight as well.
Yeah, the fact that they won that game and Jimmy was like kind of an afterthought. He made a couple of clutch plays, but like overall was sort of an afterthought in that game. It is amazing. I don't know how much you can recover over long periods of time if you keep playing on the ankle, right? So here was the thing that I didn't count how many times, but it was a lot of times. Nikola Jokic is very, very good. The one thing that he's not like the most elite at is like rim protection. And like Jimmy would drive and then like would never go up against Jokic. And that was strange to me. So that signaled that he's injured. I think he'll be fired up. I think whether that actually contributes to his ankle being like playable is going to be really, really fascinating. But if it is, that could be a huge, because Miami won kind of without him. Maybe he's at 80%, 75, something like that. So really, really interesting. I will be very keen on, if the Heat win, the Nuggets series odds will be something that I'll be really interested in.
A great point. I know you're sitting on 10-1. It's obviously not going to get better than that. I have, I think, 8-1. I was a little bit late to the party there. I think both of us probably have a better ticket than it's going to get, but I would if it gets to plus odds, which I honestly don't even know if it will. But if it does, I would probably recommend that as a bet.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. That is our podcast. We love you all. Thanks for hanging out with us. Reminder to go join the Discord if you have not already. Give us a share, like, subscribe, do those things. We do have a new YouTube channel, by the way. I forgot to mention that at the top, that you should go subscribe to. It is All This Podcast. So go do that. The link will be on our Twitter. And also you can find us just by searching in YouTube. We'll talk to you guys on Sunday. Peace.